Yeah, I suppose the leaving of that house, boarding up, and just basically abandoning my entire life up to that point, my career in media, to study psychology and to devote my life to the spiritual experiences, essentially. The only way I could imagine how would be to pursue a doctorate in them, essentially. But realizing that path, that academic clinical path, was a distraction from my spiritual life. The moment I left that house, I was in direct connection with these entities, and they were empowering me in that way that shamans talk about spiritual empowerment with the helper spirits. Guardians, if you believe in such a thing as having a guardian spirit, directly induced into your life. Induction, again, that idea of frequency, but tapping into that frequency in a way that facilitates spiritual interaction and the building of a relationship with spirit. To collaborate, essentially, to bring certain things into the world. I began to experience automatic writing at this time. And I suppose I can tell this story. It's interesting. As I said, I was having out-of-body experiences at Michigan State, but for some reason I decided to take Hinduism, and I didn't even really know what Hinduism was. It was this almost like, oh, Hindu, that's a funny word. This is what I almost, the frame of thinking as I was signing up from the course catalog. Hinduism, well, that seems kind of funny sounding and strange. I don't know much about it. And then in the Hinduism class, the things that became apparent, I was leaving Hinduism class, and I decided to cut through the economics building. Just sometimes when I was walking around, I'd walk through the buildings just to kind of explore and to see, try to open doors, just to see if anything where I could find basements and whatnot. But I was walking through this building I'd never been in, and I decided to just sit and watch the students and people watch. And they were coming out of class, and it was busy. And at the bench I'd sat were a set of books. And I sat next to them for a while and kind of waiting for someone to claim them, but people were walking by, and I eventually realized that nobody was around to claim these, and when the place had cleared out enough to know that, I took one and I just read it, and it was a Hinduism book. And it was a dialogue between one of these Hindu yogis and a scientist, a Western scientist. And he was trying to make sense of reincarnation. The scientist was trying to meet some middle ground with this yogi. And the yogi, the more I read it, the more I got pissed off. The scientist was trying to go out on a limb to, make sense of this experience. And the yogi guy, this mystic whatever, he was just spouting dharma. He was spouting just textbook, this sort of, he wasn't really trying to break it down in the spiritual terms, the science of it. And it just made me so annoyed that, come on, you can do better than that. You can work this in terms of scientific understanding of the body, and you can do better than that. And the more I read it, the more I was annoyed by it. And I left the books there, and I went home just feeling this sort of being pissed off. And I began to write about what I'd read, essentially. This idea of reincarnation, and how can we rationalize it in scientific terms using our understanding of energy and the oscillatory nature of all energy, the observable and the unobservable sides of that system, that singular system. And so what was interesting was just, I wrote by hand all night. I mean, at 4 a.m. I was still noting that the peculiar sensation of the writing, and how after a certain point I was writing without thinking, and that's not my style at all. I was somebody, or at that time, I have to work out every sentence before I wrote it, and how to place the words, and how to arrange them for impact, and all of these considerations that I'd make before writing, and this premeditated aspect of good writing. And I'd never experienced this, of just it flowing through without thought, without inhibition. And just the sensation of that in the body almost. And I was thinking of that. And all night I wrote about what we can know safely about death. And that if we are to draw the arc of a man's life from birth to its peak, the peak of identity, the peak of ego, and then the descent back down into this almost infantile state or identity of old age. But then to draw that beyond that point as the flat line, the flatliner, into the negative of that beautiful sine wave of crest and trough, and what the crest naturally implies of the trough. The crest and the trough mirror one another as either sides of a single ripple along a surface of, say, a pond. And what makes an impact in that surface is the throwing of a stone and the interaction with the surface. And we live along surfaces. We live along the surface of physicality. And our identity forms around that. The survival along that boundary between one medium and another, liquid and air, in our metaphor. But that consciousness can extend beneath the surface. And that understanding of depth, and the depth of one's identity, and sort of, again, holding your breath and descending beneath the surface into the lower ranges of consciousness, is something I'd learned meditation of certain types can allow you to control. At any rate, I wrote about death. And at the top of the page, I wrote a single word, just death. And it was many pages. And I just thought, I went to bed late thinking, my God, what was it about that? And I was thinking, it's such of a strange sensation, that writing. What was it about that writing? And the next day, in Hinduism class, I arrived and the teacher had written a single word on the board. It was death. And just in big letters. And then they proceeded to talk about the relationship between death and life and the sort of range of duality and how all things can be reduced to this duality. And how we can know one side of duality from the other, and one implies the other, and yin-yang and whatever. He was the type of professor who went steadfastly through the book, chapter by chapter, and each week we could expect the following chapter. And this was the first time in the class that I recall him ever straying from the book. This was not in the chapter. This was all just coming off the top of his head. And it was such of a unique thing in terms of that professor to write death after I had written death in big letters. And as I left, I thought, how strange that the professor would talk about what I'd written about. Death and the duality, and exactly everything that I had been thinking the night before when I was writing in that inspired way. And as I walked back after class to my dorm, I walked by the communications buildings, and there was a piece of lined paper on the grass alongside the sidewalk. There was a square of lined paper face down. And I walked by it, and I walked all the way, like 40 yards, to the stoplight. And as I was standing at the stoplight, I thought, no, I gotta go back. I don't know, I gotta go back. And I walked all the way back, and I went on the lawn and I picked up that piece of paper. What do you think it said? Just guess.
I assume you're going to say death.
It was a single word. In all caps, written on a square of lined paper. And at that point, it was almost just like zoning out at the thought of, what does this mean? The astronomical improbability of that being written on this paper. And what was it inside of me that made me walk back? Why would I ever do that? What strange magnetism was at play? And then seeing what it said and realizing I am surrounded by conscious entities who have this message for me. What else could it imply? Death and death and death, all within a very short period of a few hours. I almost got weak in the knees there on the lawn. It was just such of a powerful experience. But it wasn't an answer. It was just, all that night, what was it about this writing? And what was it? And all that following day, after seeing death, what is it? That's my writing, and there it is. And what is it about that writing? What is it? And then seeing this, and they go, oh, what does this mean? This is my writing. The writing was death, and here it is again. What is it about that writing and the sensation of that inspired nature of it? That strange feeling of in the chest and whatnot. And all that day I was just rolling it over again and again in my head, and then I didn't sleep. It was such a powerful experience. And all the next morning again, going through class, and what the hell was it about the writing? What is it about that writing? What does this mean? And trying to rationalize as best I could. And I went in front of the student hospital on Grand River Avenue, and I sat at a bus stop bench. And I looked down, and I swear to God, between my toes was a piece of masking tape. Between my shoes was a single word written on masking tape in blue magic marker, and it was a Hindu word, Shruti. And I had to look it up. It's a Hindu word used to describe writing. A type of writing in Hindu scripture which is divinely inspired. And that struck me very powerfully. Why? Who? I'm in the only Hinduism class within 100 miles, and we are not studying this word. So it's not someone from class who wrote this down. It wasn't like a note-taking. It was somebody from outside of our class, assumedly. We hadn't talked about that word. Who wrote that word down on masking tape and placed it on the sidewalk? And why the fuck would they ever do that? Why? Who? What impelled them to do that? And all that day, up until that bench, I was, what is it about this writing? What is it about the death and the writing? What does this mean? And soul searching, really, fretting, not losing sleep. It was just such of an intense spiritual emergency. And this is Dr. Groff and this transpersonal understanding in the DSM of spiritual emergence and emergency. They make that a single concept of spiritual emergence as something coming up and out, and the emergency of that. The not knowing how to withstand that. And the ordeal of an emergency as it manifests as convulsive seizures, as intense visionary experience, as exceptional range of universal human experience and the history of these experiences. Back through prehistory and the shaman, the first occupation our species had. It's up in the air if it's a shaman or a hooker, it's where we prostituting or, it's a toss-up, but whether or not we were horny or healing first. Anyway, what do you think? What's going through your head?
It's all very open to my experience.
and there's a healthy skepticism.
Well, what I struggle with is trying to understand how I can be beneficial to you. It seems like you, well, I don't know if you've decided or if it's been decided for you to pursue the life of a shaman.
And what does that even mean? You know, it's
Right.
How do I integrate that into a culture that doesn't exist in? And being a psychologist, is that the closest I can hope to get, or is there some way to integrate spirit and that spiritual path that I was on in Michigan when that relationship was strongest, and how that academic clinical route has weakened that relationship with spirit and weakened that path that seems to be tied inextricably to the illness.
Is the academic path a necessity for you? I'm assuming that I'm assuming that a person that's a shaman is kind of in some way channeling the spirit world for the benefit of others. I don't know, to bring them knowledge or...
that they have a non-ordinary range of knowledge that they have access to, which can be ideally in service of society. And so how does that manifest? In so many ways, the shaman would serve society not just by healing, but by predicting, by finding lost objects, by being able to ascend out of body and see from a perspective above, the perspective of height, and see where the game are moving. This is very common in Native American culture.
Wouldn't your time be better spent apprenticing under a shaman as opposed to doing academic research?
This is really the next phase of my spiritual experiences and how they began to guide me in, again, these astronomically improbable ways. At that same time of, getting the Shruti, and I still have the piece of paper, but I didn't reach over and peel up the Shruti thing. I didn't take it, and I wish I would have. Thinking back, the significance of the word did not sink in until considerably later. I just read it and and then learning what it was later, or recalling and realizing it describes writing like God. It describes a type of writing. Fuck, what is it about this writing? And my answer came to me. I've been rolling over, what is it about this writing, and there it is. How do you rationalize that? It's astronomically improbable. And I use that now, perhaps overuse that term, astronomically improbable, that someone would put Shruti between my toes. I mean, do you agree?
Yes,
How would
can't
you
possibly see any explanation for it.
It's not random. And to say at that point, to disregard that as random, meaningless, is the irrational stance to take. It really is. To disregard that as random is irrational. The probability just isn't there.
Are you writing a book about your experiences?
No,
Why not?
I hope to someday.
Okay.
But right now, this dissertation is just plugging away. I'm not plugging away. I haven't even started, and it's tearing me apart. I can't start it. And that's how am I going to do this? But as I speak to you, I get clarity. I have been talking about measuring the semantic priming and the latent inhibition of these people as they take ayahuasca, but now I realize that is a distraction. That what I really want to measure is the electromyelographic signature of the ayahuasca experience. Electromyelographic, that's the quivering.
So the ayahuasca produces a sort of quivering experience?
Oh my goodness. Overwhelmingly so. And I recall laying on the floor of an ayahuasca church and just the pulsing. My whole nervous system had my whole nervous system was resonating at a low frequency oscillation. Boom, 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 boom. And it was just this pulsing of my nervous system at this low frequency. As I meditated down into it, my nervous system resonated as it does in that tonal meditation, but I lowered it to this state of I was just laying there on the floor, but my whole body was pulsing and there was no reason for it. A type of convulsive state, I suppose you could say, but of such of a exceptional speed, low frequency, yeah.
I don't even know if you can call it convulsive when it seems
pulsing. It was a pulsing, yeah, pulse, and they just watched me on the floor, and it was right up my nervous system, right up my spine. That was something that I would have loved to have captured. Could you imagine measuring that and seeing the graph of it on the computer? That is what I would like to measure and make a dissertation of that. Seems the most significant. Yeah.
Does it vary between people, or is it?
It does. And so this is something that occurs to me, but when I was drinking ayahuasca in the Amazon, people that worked in that, for instance, the Order of Light was one of these retreats that had and offered ayahuasca experiences in a supposedly traditional circle with a shaman. And their shamans were dubious, they were questionable. He had found them in the deep Shipibo Amazon, and they were traditionally dressed, but I'm not sure they were really experienced in the art of healing. But they knew how to make ayahuasca, and that was really the bottom line. But there were Westerners there, and they said, I've never seen anyone react to ayahuasca the way you do. And the one said she saw blue light as they did this. They did extraction, it's called. And they were extracting something that was inside of me, and from my chest, her name was Cielo, she was Australian, she was one of the guides, and she went to touch the light as it came out of me, and the shaman slapped her hand away and said, no, you don't want to touch this. They both saw it, in other words. And blue-white light has been part of my life since the woman in white light. And when I see a flash of blue-white light in the periphery of my vision, to me, I've come to acknowledge that as meaningful, as signifying the presence of her, of some greater in the room. And that room, my bedroom, and to think that each of the 5 renters that has been there since that time has seen the tessellated patterns of blue-white light at night when they look at the ceiling, and that they'll describe them to me, and I will never. They don't know each other, but the 5th one, each of them had said, "Oh yeah, that room, I see things at night," and I'd never bait for it. I'd just call them, "How's everything going with the house?" And he said, "Well, I'm cool with it, but my girlfriend's a little scared about the children she hears running down the stairs at night, and that she's afraid when the plates smash against the wall. But I'm cool with it, I'm not afraid." He was getting kind of macho about it. And I was like, wow, it's still there. That house, it's still there. Poltergeist activity, I suppose we called it. They all said that room was where they saw the light. And except for the last one, the most recent guy, and I was waiting for it. The whole time he was there, over a year, and I was waiting for him to mention something when we talked. So it's like, oh, maybe it's gone. But as he was leaving the house, I just made an open-ended, this was curious, did anything strange ever happen in that house? It's open-ended. He said, oh, I thought you would never ask. That room, that bedroom downstairs, I would see things at night that I thought I was crazy. And yeah, that's, I'm not meant to tell you about it, it's whatever. Yeah, the actual heat. Remember as I walked in, the red hot walls that had absorbed the energy of this being. And that lasted for months and months. And just to imagine the idea of energy that powerful that it's absorbed by the walls themselves. And of course that would leave some residue, wouldn't it? Yeah. I mean, environments hold history of what's occurred there. And if you believe in such a thing as an emotional signature of if someone is hurt in a place or someone has a very powerful emotional experience, that can be felt and that can also be held by an environment. If you, William Broad did some interesting research into that very thing. In remote viewing, all these interesting areas of research. But anyway, everybody sees it there. And that's a very meaningful thing to me. Why is it meaningful? It's because it confirms. It is confirmation. The reality of my experience. As if I had any doubt. But it helps to have a collective of people experiencing this same thing. In a room, in a place, in physical manifestation, in physical evidence of this thing is important to me. It's part of rationalizing it for me. To have the accounts of others, the subjective experiences of others, alongside of the physical manifestation of the thing.
What does the rationalization do for you?
Well, how else do you make sense of things like this? How would you rationalize it if not how I have? Is there any other explanation you could think of?
I guess I guess what I'm questioning is that it needs any rationalization.
Oh, just let it go? And just pretend it didn't happen? Is that the advice? Or
the opposite?
Because that was what my girlfriend wanted to do. Is
accept it for what it is.
She wanted to move on. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at the ceiling. I don't want this. I don't want to think about it anymore. And I couldn't let it go. I had to hold it in my thoughts until it made sense.
If you're having experiences that are confirmed by others who've had similar experiences, you go to them and you seek knowledge about what you're experiencing.
And do you collect evidence?
It depends on what your purpose is.
To be believed. I don't want anyone to look at me like I'm crazy. I don't want anyone to doubt the reality of my experience.
Being believed is really quite incidental to the
Is it?
experience of it, don't you think?
If a shaman is not believed, he has no profession. And how does one convince? A lot of shamanism is convincing. And these people need convincing. They need to see the chicken blood, whatever, liver, whatever they extracted. They need to see it as something they cough up or something that, whatever. They need to be, there's an aspect of performance in shamanism that I don't really know how to wrap my head around.
I guess I was thinking of it more like a religion.
I don't want it to be a belief, or I don't want there to be any doubt, any room for doubt. I want it to be science, as in something that people can measure, study, and replicate. Replicate. My goodness, how does one replicate these things? But that's really the discerning difference between, biological science, of measuring, of physical sciences, and psychology, and parapsychology. It's replication. Can you replicate these exceptional experiences? And I believe so. But it's not easy. It doesn't mean I give up. It doesn't mean I say these are beyond the purview of science because of the difficulty in replicating them. But finding means of replicating them with things like ayahuasca, which can reliably induce a very powerful state of consciousness in other people. This is where I need to aim to do this electromyelographic study. Yeah, it's I don't know how to interpret that clinically and whatnot. I don't know. It's a clinical dissertation after all. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it time?
I don't know. Honestly, it's well past.
Any red flags or anything?
Well, I'm just trying to understand it as best I can the direction you want to head, and it would seem that you want to devote yourself more to the scientific validation of your experiences than to the actual practice of being a shaman.
How to integrate the two. I can't just give up on my doctorate, can I? It feels like such of a horrible thing to do at this rate. I've been in school long enough. I've dropped so much money in at this point.
Well, it's simply a choice. You know, I don't have any preference one way or another. If research is what interests you, then that's what you should do, right?
It's not generally advice they like to give. Drop out of school. But sometimes it feels like I'm not being authentic. It's true. Yeah, authentic to this spiritual manifestation that was. And we can get into so many more stories. They extend on and on into the Amazon. But yeah, that's for another time maybe. I don't want it to be a storytelling thing.
If I were to put myself in your shoes, my reaction would be that the whole scientific investigation is somewhat mundane in comparison to the experiences themselves.
Yeah. I don't know how to integrate.
I suppose would draw me in. I would want to explore that other world.
Yeah, I don't know how to integrate having a career and doing this. It's I don't know how to heal people. There's so much potential there, but I don't have any, like you said, to work under somebody. There's nobody around. Anyway, I'll let you go. Oh, that seemed like you had some commitment.
Yeah, I'm sure I have a 6 or a 6:30. I'm not quite sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's interesting talking with you, Caleb. I'll see you next week.
Bye.